The sky is falling for Democrats. Maybe. Training season's over, the first quarter of the general election has begun, and right now, Joe Biden has a little momentum. He's rolling in money compared to Trump, and some polls show him bouncing back a little bit.
Biden's back, baby!
But there's an ongoing, flashing red warning sign for him: voters of color. Right now, polls show Biden doing worse among Black and Latino voters than any modern polling has ever shown for a Democratic president, like in all of modern history. And there's an unfolding debate among political observers over just how accurate that is and just how much Democrats should worry. And there are some real reasons to be skeptical of what the polls are showing. We'll get to that. But first, there are also big reasons to believe something real is happening. Democratic strategists privately acknowledge it. Many leaders who work in communities of color are shouting about it. And most of all, we've already seen it happen once. In 2020, a year filled with enough twists and turns to make Shonda Rhimes skeptical, one of the most significant was this: Donald Trump made big gains among non-white voters. According to the data firm Catalyst, which is regarded as one of the best exit poll analysts, he hit 25% of all non-white voters. And that was really notable. It was up from his performance in 2016, up from Mitt Romney's in 2012, and up from John McCain's in 2008. In fact, Biden's only gains in 2020 were among white voters, especially white voters with a college degree, who tend to be wealthier than the average American. And that kind of scrambled a lot of Democrats' brains. After 4 years of overtly anti-immigrant and, yes, racist statements, their party had lost a ton of the voters they claimed to be advocating for to a guy they considered a bigoted buffoon. But those losses weren't equal everywhere. Black voters barely moved. Asian voters barely moved. But Latino voters went from favoring Hillary by almost 40 points to Biden by just over 20. And that had real impacts on the results. For example, Biden did better than Hillary Clinton in 44 out of 50 states. 3 of the 6 he did worse in were California, Nevada, and Florida, the states with the 2nd, 5th, and 6th highest population of Latinos. And when you drill down even further, the shift among Latinos came overwhelmingly from one subgroup: working class Latinos without a college degree. The 2020 shifts were so huge that, for the first time, a white person with a college degree was more likely to vote for a Democrat than a Latino person without one. And Trump outright won Latinos living in rural areas, according to Catalyst. Now, the funny thing is, that coalition shift was actually good for Democrats electorally, because there are more white people with degrees in key swing states. But it was confusing to many liberals and validating for many conservatives who had spent years arguing that not only was Trump's conservative populism not racist, but that it actually had more appeal to working class people of color than the John McCain, Mitt Romney brand of republicanism. There was a ton of conversation after 2020 about this. And one thing that a lot of Democrats comforted themselves with was the idea that there was something unique about 2020. And there were some fair arguments there. The lockdowns especially hurt working class people who depended on their wage work, and Trump was the candidate of reopening. Trump was also the incumbent, and every incumbent president since Bill Clinton has gained among Latino voters in their re-election. But then 2022 happened, and congressional Republicans got the exact same margin among Latino voters that Trump got in 2020. So that's the backdrop. It happened in 2020, it continued in 2022, and now, in 2024, the polls show it not only getting worse, but spreading. A Financial Times analysis of polls from the first couple months of 2024 showed alarming trends for Democrats. Biden's margin with Latinos being cut by 20 points, and his margin with Black voters being cut by 25. Again, the worst performance for a Democratic presidential candidate in pre-election polling in modern history. Now, this is the point where a lot of people are probably thinking, okay, but is there a chance the polls are wrong? And the answer is yes, always. And there are some real red flags in some of these polls. One is that many of these polls are predicting a bigger change in the voting patterns of people of color than we've seen since the 1970s, but also still showing a tight, narrow race, which is pretty contradictory. Another is that many of these polls showing doom for Biden among voters of color also show him losing young voters to Trump, which no one in either party actually expects will happen. And even if that's true right now, that could actually be a good sign for Democrats. About half of young voters are people of color, So if Trump's big gains among people of color are concentrated among that group that right now is heavily disillusioned by Biden over a number of things, including inflation and the war in Gaza, then there's a real chance that at least part of this is just temporary and could just fix itself within the next 6 months of campaigning. But there are also an increasing number of signs that what we are watching is not just limited to the presidential race. In February, Gallup, one of the country's best pollsters, found the share of Black and Latino voters who identify with or lean towards Republicans to be at the highest point since they started asking the question. You're welcome to say those polls are just wrong. Spend any time on Twitter, and you will find a bunch of new friends to join you. But let's imagine for a moment that they're right. Why? Why is this happening, and why now? Well, before we go any further, it's worth specifying one thing. For decades, voters of color have actually been the most conservative parts of Democrats' coalition. During Barack Obama's presidency, when the party was shifting left, Gallup polling showed Black and Latino Democrats lagged white Democrats in becoming supportive of same-sex marriage or self-identifying as liberals. To this day, those voters are far more likely to be churchgoers and far less likely to identify as liberal than white Democrats. The reason isn't because Black and Latino Americans are more conservative than white Americans. It's because the Black and Latino Americans who are conservative churchgoers have been Democrats, while the white Americans who are conservative churchgoers have been Republicans. That pretty clearly stems from Black and Latino voters' negative assessment of what the Republican Party thinks of them and their identity. And it's one of the reasons that, for a long time, Republicans were so frustrated about Latino voters especially. On paper, many of them aligned with Republicans, but kept voting for Democrats.
Hispanics are inherently conservative.
But that has started to change big time. In 2012, an NBC Telemundo poll showed Latinos who call themselves conservative still preferred Democratic control of Congress. 10 years later, in 2022, that same group preferred Republican control by nearly 60 points. So a big part of these shifts we're seeing is that the same way culturally liberal white people sprinted to Democrats under Trump, culturally conservative people of color are drifting towards Republicans. But it's not just culture. There are mounting signs that what we are watching is a class issue. Remember, these shifts are not uniform among all voters of color. They are concentrated among working class people. Biden won people of color who do not have a college degree by almost 50 points in 2020. But a March New York Times Siena poll, again, one of the best pollsters in the country, found him leading among that group by just 6 points. So, taken together, there is a uniform message coming out of both the 2020 results and the 2024 polls. Joe Biden has melted among working class people of color. And that would kind of make sense given there is a broader global realignment of working class voters right now. Across Western democracies, political coalitions have been scrambled in the past decade. Overwhelmingly, traditionally conservative parties have started winning in working class and rural areas, while traditionally liberal parties are now winning among urban and white-collar professionals. We see it in the UK, we see it in Canada, we saw it in the 2022 French presidential election, and we've already seen this among white voters here at home. Personally, my favorite example is Minnesota. Here's what the congressional map looked like the year Barack Obama was elected in 2008. Republicans winning this ring of red in the suburbs around Minneapolis, surrounded by a sea of rural blue districts. By 2022, it was the complete opposite. Republicans winning rurals, Democrats winning suburbs. So this realignment is happening worldwide. It already happened among working class white Americans. Trump made big inroads among working class non-white Americans in 2020, and now polls show him making even bigger inroads in 2024. Is it really so absurd to think that the polls are accurate and Biden really has lost ground with these groups? Remember, Trump already won Latinos in rural areas. He already won a bigger share of Latino men without college degrees than white women with degrees. And that makes sense when you consider that proximity to cities and wealth has become a key marker of Democratic performance. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won just 15% of counties nationwide, but the counties she won represented 64% of the country's GDP. And in 2020, that grew even more. The counties Biden won represented 70% of the country's GDP. And that's a pretty striking story. The farther you are from wealth and growth, the more likely you are to vote for Republicans. And if there's a group that is far from wealth and power in America right now, It's Black and Latino people. While both groups have, like all of America, improved from where they were when Biden took office, they're still in a different category than everyone else, especially Black and Latino men. Consider, Black and Latino Americans have the highest unemployment rates. They are more likely to be victims of substance abuse, more likely to be victims of police violence or killing, less likely to make it to college, less likely to graduate from college if they even make it there. And they were the most affected by inflation, and continue to be the most affected by prices that still haven't come down even as inflation has. Yes, Democrats can absolutely make the case that they support policies that could alleviate some of those problems. And it's worth emphasizing that, despite their shifting coalitions, the party's platforms on the minimum wage or union protections or tax increases on the wealthy haven't changed. But these are voters whose lives have objectively not been transformed by a Biden presidency. And they're being blown by the winds of that global class realignment we talked about. Now look, it's important to remember, even if the big shift polls are predicting right now turns out to be true, Democrats are basically guaranteed to overwhelmingly win people of color no matter what. And it's worth it for both the media and Democrats to reflect on their fixation on these smaller fluctuations when white voters are still the largest portion of the electorate and therefore have much more power over the election. But demographic groups are not winner take all. These changes under the hood matter. And remember, Biden barely carried the Electoral College in 2020 while winning more than 90% of the Black vote and 60% of the Latino vote. Dropping even a few points would still leave him with an overwhelming, enormous share of both, but given the margins are so tight, it would still probably be enough to bring Trump back to the White House. Look, there is a whole campaign left to be fought, and a lot of things could change. But the warning signs are there, and the stakes of this election are high enough that we should get ready for that.